We've been misinformed, and that's called innovation and evolution of science.
Yeah.
What we thought 50 years ago is not true today. Today we know that they're an essential, really a dispensable nutrient, and it's the benefits, it's the mechanism of benefit of a plant-based diet. Nitric oxide knocks over the first domino, then everything else takes place from that.
Okay.
But without nitric oxide, you don't get the cascade, you don't get the signaling, you don't get the domino effect. How much nitric oxide does the human body make in a normal, healthy person? And then in people that can't make nitric oxide, can we give that back? Can we give back what's missing?
All right, well, let's kick this off. Episode 1 of Heartbeat Happy Hour. I'm your host, Anthony Turturro. This is my co-host, Dr. Nathan Bryan. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. Good to be with you, my brother.
Yeah, man. It feels like this has been a project we've been working on for quite some time. It's good to kick it off.
Well, it's the Heartbeat Happy Hour. Cheers.
Cheers. There we go.
All right. Where the pulse of science resonates with the rhythm of life.
Love it. Love it.
So yeah, this is going to be fun.
Yeah,
I think it's important to communicate what's happening kind of behind the scenes, the forefront of science, and bring that out to the public so we can inform, educate, and bring awareness around what we're doing. Give
a relaxing, informal environment, atmosphere, and consumable education for all our viewers. Yeah,
that's right.
I love it. I love it. So you've been busy. Been
Very
flying
busy.
around, traveling, living that life.
Yeah, I think I probably spent 6 days at home in the month of March.
Oh man.
So yeah, it's busy. This is the busy time of year in terms of medical conferences and lectures, invited lectures, giving keynotes, presenting at medical conferences, and really just trying to spread the word on nitric oxide and build awareness.
I've always been intrigued. When normally when you think of a scientist, you think of someone behind a lab mixing stuff together and smoke's coming out or something. But I mean, you have a totally different lifestyle. I mean, you're traveling all over, going to shows, speaking. Where was there a difference in your past to where it took a different, future forward approach as far as your regular scientist who's in the lab researching to where you then spread your wings outward from the lab?
Well, I think number one, I recognize the blessings and the gifts I've been given, and I think there's two important dates in your life: the day you were born and the day you realized why you were born. And I think for me, that came, we'd made a lot of discoveries in nitric oxide early on, and I absolutely believed and knew that the discoveries we'd made would transform medicine and change the way that we treated patients and really on health and longevity and this wellness, not sickness care, but health care. And the frustrations came from me when I was in academia. I was a professor of molecular medicine, and we'd made the discoveries. I'd filed patents. And so for me, it was like I knew enough information. I felt confident enough that we'd learned enough about nitric oxide to where I could develop safe and effective therapeutics because we knew how the human body made nitric oxide. We knew what went wrong in people that couldn't make it. And we knew how to recapitulate that, how to make nitric oxide and deliver that into patients in real time. So when you go through academia and the licensing kind of channels of the university, the typical model is they take your license, they take your patents, and they license it to existing companies. And this is at a time, 20 years ago, where there wasn't a whole lot of companies interested in nitric oxide.
Yeah.
So for me, going down this road for 2 to 3 years and no interest, and it was like, well, look, if it's to be, it's up to me, right? If this is going to happen, I can't rely on somebody else to make this happen. I've got to be the force. I have to be the impetus for this to happen. So then I transformed really into an entrepreneur because I knew that really at that point, I knew a lot about, in fact, probably more about nitric oxide and the fundamentals of nitric oxide biochemistry and physiology than anybody in the field. We were publishing 10, 12, 15 papers a year. And so we were making a lot of discoveries and understanding on it. So then the question was, how do we take concepts, a conceptual kind of theory around nitric oxide, and how do we productize that? How do we create a solid dose form of nitric oxide gas? And so then that took, some efforts to collaborate with the right people in pharmacology and drug development. And we made a solid dose form of nitric oxide gas. And, then we had to really create the market because no one knew what nitric oxide was. We had a solution to a problem no one knew existed. So then the mission became, we have to go out and educate and inform several billion people on what nitric oxide is, why they should be concerned with it, and why they should consider taking a product that produces nitric oxide.
And that's not easy.
No, that's not easy at all. I mean, the hardest thing is to re-educate, right? And so when early on we realized that most patients and most consumers said, well, if my doctor said it was okay, I would take it. So then we switched and go, okay, now we got to go out and educate doctors, which is a very challenging task to go re-educate and really inform them that the principles and the fundamentals of medicine they learned in medical school were wrong.
Yeah, that's difficult.
That's very difficult because people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars 4, 6, 10, 12 years in their medical education, postgraduate. And then to go and tell them that the model in which they're practicing medicine and treating their patients is flawed.
Yeah.
And once you kind of see the forest through the trees, then you start to realize, okay, well, nobody's getting better in Western medicine because they practice pharmacology, right? You make a diagnosis, and then once you make a diagnosis, you have a finite list of things you can do to that patient because it's based on ICD-9, ICD-10 codes, reimbursement. It's the financial model of medicine. But you never address the root cause of the disease. So what we're trying to do is transform the way not only physicians think about their patients, but the way the patients think about their own health. And what we know about nitric oxide is that the onset and progression of most, if not all, chronic diseases can be attributed to the functional loss of nitric oxide. And the hallmarks of every single chronic disease are low blood flow, poor circulation, inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysfunction.
Yes.
And when we give nitric oxide, you improve blood flow and circulation. You reduce inflammation, you inhibit oxidative stress, and you suppress the immune response, the immune dysfunction. So it's really the holy grail in medicine. It gets to the underlying root cause of most, if not all, chronic diseases.
Yeah, which is surprising then that most doctors would not already have a good understanding of it to begin with, right?
Well, it's not taught in medical school. You know, this is still a new discovery in medicine, a Nobel Prize in 98. You know, when I was at UT Medical School at Houston, I taught a course called the Molecular Basis of Cell Signaling. And that was really the only course. It was only to MD, PhD students. It wasn't your regular medical students. It was an elective course for your MD, PhD, your physician scientist. And I think that's the only, I mean, maybe in a little bit of physiology, maybe just a touch in pharmacology when you talk about drugs like Viagra and Cialis and phosphodiesterase inhibitors. There's an involvement of nitric oxide. So there may be a mention of it, but certainly not a comprehensive understanding of what nitric oxide is and does in the human body and how it contributes to the onset and progression of chronic disease.
Okay. Well, I want to talk more about nitric oxide and the benefits and so forth for our viewers, but I want to take a step back and because I'm fascinated with your story overall, but I kind of look at myself and I'm like, okay, man, I went to college, I did criminal justice, forensic psychology, had my internship with police department out in Florida, and I was like, nah, this isn't going to be my path, and then went into the military. When was it that you decided what you wanted to go into, but then how you got into nitric oxide to begin with?
Yeah, you know, some of the most important kind of revelations in life are not really what you want to be, but what you don't want to be.
Yeah.
And so I tell my own kids, you know, try a lot of things and figure out, number one, figure out what you're good at, but more importantly, figure out what you like. And if you like something, you can be good at it. Yeah. For the most part. So
enjoy it. Yeah.
I was always interested in science and medicine. You know, and I'm blessed. I didn't have to study a lot. I could recall things. I could read something. I could write something, and I could just recall it. So I did well in school, graduated at the top of my class with very little studying, very little effort. And then I went to University of Texas and got a degree in biochemistry. And then with a bachelor's degree in biochemistry, I quickly realized there's not a lot of demand for jobs with a degree in biochemistry.
Now, when you went to University of Texas, did you still have that ability where it was just very easy, it clicked with you with school, you didn't really have to study much?
No, that was a game changer for me because there for the first time, I mean, the biochemistry program at the University of Texas was probably one of the most challenging and difficult degree programs there were. And so I had to study. The problem was I had to work. I was working 30, 40 hours a week and taking 15, 16 hours of college courses
Wow.
because I had to fund my own education.
What'd you do for work?
I waited tables and bus tables and cooked at Outback Steakhouse.
There you go.
Whatever it took, right? So it provided me the discipline because I didn't have a lot of free time, and so I had to maximize the time I had. But for the first time in my life, I had to actually study and learn physical chemistry, biochemistry, physics, calculus, differential equations. This was a new science to me. So it provided me the discipline to multitask and to take on a lot of stress, take on a lot of things, but focus on the academics.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the first job I got out of college was as an analytical chemist at Phenol Oil and Chemical in Deer Park, Texas. And I spent probably a year there, and it was the most mundane, monotonous job I've ever had in my life. And I went in every day, did the same thing, quality control on plastics, on refined products from the crude oil that comes out of the ground to different stages of the refining process to the end product of gasoline, kerosene, and different grades of gas. So it was analytical quality control, and it was absolutely awful. You weren't allowed to think. You just go in, do the same thing every day.
So you're testing and stuff?
Testing, doing kind of analytical chemistry. So then I realized in order for me to do what I wanted to do, I needed to go in further education. So I enrolled at LSU School of Medicine in a PhD program in molecular and cellular physiology. And this was at the time that the Nobel Prize was awarded for the discovery of nitric oxide. And one of my mentors in that program was a pharmacologist who'd been involved in nitric oxide since the 80s, Martin Felish. And he introduced me to the science of nitric oxide. I met with Lou Ignarro, one of the guys who had just won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of nitric oxide. And there was a lot of excitement around this, but it was a gas that's naturally produced. There weren't any methods or techniques to develop to analyze and really detect nitric oxide that's produced in biological systems. So really my entire PhD work was on developing sensitive and selective methods to detect nitric oxide gas. And, we solved this riddle, and, I think I finished my PhD in less than 2 years.
Wow.
And then I went to Boston, and I trained as a cardiology fellow at Boston Medical Center, really focusing on vascular biology and the cardiovascular effects of nitric oxide. And then after, I think, a year and a half as a postdoc, I applied to a faculty position at UT Medical School in Houston. Fred Murad, again, one of the other gentlemen who shared the Nobel Prize for the discovery of nitric oxide, hired me, gave me my first faculty position, and then for the first year, all I did was go in the lab. I had the instrumentation, the analytical equipment that I could really produce compositions of matter that could produce nitric oxide. So I figured out a way to put these components together to generate a certain amount of nitric oxide that would basically restore normal nitric oxide production in the human. That was the game changer. I started filing patents. I published or submitted dozens of invention disclosures to the university. Their lawyers would look at it, submit patents, file patents. Patents started being issued. And then, as we discussed before, then it was like, I thought I'd solve this great mystery and hoping to reap the benefits of that. And then it was like the most anticlimactic period of my life.
It was like phase one of
it's like nothing's happening.
The rest of the journey.
Nothing's happening. And so that really what shifted kind of my career path. And then, I left academia many years ago because there's conflicts of interest issues that you got to manage. If you've got a for-profit company and you're doing research and you're employed by the university, then you have to manage conflicts of interest, and it became too overwhelming. I mean, they basically want to handcuff you and prevent you from innovating and doing research. But that's just part of the system. It's in place for a reason. But everything happens. I'm a firm believer that everything happens in your life at the right time for a specific reason, and allows us to pivot and take a new direction that perhaps we didn't plan or even intended. But I look back now, and the longer I live, the more I realize that how little control I had really over my life and the decisions. I think God put people and places and incidents and situations in my life at specific times to lead me down a very specific path.
God's plan.
And here we are today,
Here we are.
25 years later, and having a happy hour cocktail.
Good times, right? It's intriguing to me, and maybe you can tell our viewers more about just the basics of nitric oxide, but like you said, it's a gas. And with it being in the body, how was it actually discovered in the first place? And then I'd like to know more about how you discovered the ingredients in which would actually work as a
Yeah.
consumable product.
The discovery of nitric oxide is a very interesting story, and it's really where really three independent lines of research came together. Kind of isolated discoveries in their own right, but when you put the pieces of that puzzle together, it really told the complete story of nitric oxide. One of the most important discoveries in the history of vascular biology was Bob Furchgott in 1980. He discovered that our endothelial cells, the cells that line all the blood vessels throughout the body, when activated, released a substance that causes the blood vessels to relax. And he published this in 1980, and he called
What was the substance?
it was called endothelium-derived relaxing factor.
Huh.
So he named it for what it did, not for what it was.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So it was a relaxing factor released by the endothelial cells. So no one knew what this was. 3 years earlier, Fred Muir had discovered that drugs like nitroglycerin that were used for the treatment of acute angina for coronary artery disease would dilate the blood vessels because they released nitric oxide, activated a second messenger. So then after 1980, the race was on. What is EDRF? And then 7 years later, it was realized that EDRF is nitric oxide. And that was a surprise. And the Nobel Committee basically informed us that the signal transduction by a gas is a completely new paradigm in signaling. So nitric oxide is produced by the lining of the blood vessel. It's a gas. Once it's produced, it's gone in less than a second. But during that second it's around, it activates a number of signaling pathways. So it starts the domino effect. Nitric oxide knocks over the first domino, and then everything else takes place from there.
Okay.
But without nitric oxide, you don't get the cascade. You don't get the signaling. You don't get the domino effect. Because everything downstream that happens from nitric oxide regulates blood pressure, inflammation, immune dysfunction, oxidative stress, turns on longevity genes, turns on mitochondrial biogenesis. If you can't make nitric oxide, then nothing else happens. So those were the fundamental discoveries that led to the Nobel Prize. And then kind of what changed my course was I had a guy that was trained in China, went to medical school in China. And we were testing a lot of the traditional medicines, Chinese medicines that they'd used for thousands of years for the treatment of high blood pressure. And so we realized we tested a lot of these, and a lot of these medicines were actually producing nitric oxide.
Interesting.
So once we kind of distilled down into the active components, did countercurrent chromatography and all these extraction techniques, we isolated certain components of that when we put them together, we could generate nitric oxide gas.
Okay.
So now I realized how we put these components together in certain ratios, we could dial in any level of nitric oxide we wanted. It's very powerful, and nobody's been able to do that. Then the next question was, well, how much nitric oxide does the human body make in a normal, healthy person? And then in people that can't make nitric oxide, can we give that back? Can we give back what's missing? So it's a very similar strategy to vitamin D. If you go to your doctor, he draws blood, and you got a vitamin D level of 30. Obviously, that's low. We wanted to get it up to 80.
Okay.
So to get from 30 to 80, what do? You dial in a level of vitamin D that can get you from low to optimal. So it's the same thing with nitric oxide. So we dial in a certain level of nitric oxide that we can get you to a normal 18, 20-year-old, well-trained athlete, healthy kid, and a 50-year-old that's obviously depleted. How much nitric oxide do we need to give to optimize that person for nitric oxide? And that's what we've done that no one else has been able to do.
So when it comes to nitric oxide, it depletes as you age.
Typically.
Typically. So let's go back to vitamin D. Let's say someone's deficient in vitamin D. Does vitamin D just automatically deplete as you age, such as nitric oxide?
Well, vitamin D is a little bit different because there's different sources. You get it from sunlight exposure and activating the inactive form of vitamin D to the active form. Your body can produce it naturally, but there's a lot. So nitric oxide is a hormone. So a better analogy would be like hormone, like growth hormone or testosterone or estrogen, where you certainly see an age-related decline in these hormones.
Okay.
So very similar effects with nitric oxide. You can see an age-related decline in nitric oxide. And so similar to hormone replacement therapy with estrogen and testosterone, we can do hormone replacement therapy with nitric oxide because it is a hormone, and we just got to replete what's missing and create and basically fill that delta.
So, and what I was kind of getting at too is there other areas like vitamin D, vitamin A, so forth, that would deplete with the nitric oxide depletion as you age?
Well, vitamin D specifically has been shown to activate and stimulate nitric oxide production. It's
Okay.
part of how we maintain normal NO production. So in people that have low vitamin D, they have less activation, stimulation of nitric oxide.
Mm-hmm.
And that partially accounts for the health disparities of African Americans.
Okay.
Darker skinned people have typically lower vitamin D levels because of the darker pigmentation and the less activation from sunlight you get
I know
from activation. So yeah, there's clear connections. Look, every part of the body talks to the other part. And so nitric oxide is foundational. We have to restore the production of that, but you still got to focus on optimizing other things: vitamin D, testosterone, estrogen, thyroid hormone. Nitric oxide is foundational, but your body cannot and will not heal without nitric oxide. But then that allows you to focus on other deficiencies or other issues. But what's clear is if you don't first focus on nitric oxide, then anything else you do, whether it's hormone replacement therapy, vitamin D optimization, or any other supplementation or drug therapy, until we restore nitric oxide signaling, the body cannot and will not heal.
Okay. Interesting. So we've gone from the discovery to where you started to discover the ingredients and so forth that could actually create whatever level you needed. Now, once you put those ingredients together and it becomes a consumable for someone to take, how do you then measure the success of what has been formulated?
Well, we test. We don't guess, we test.
Okay.
So any product we bring to market, number one, we have to make sure it's shelf stable.
Okay.
Number two, when we deliver this product technology to the end consumer, does it work in every single patient the exact same way? To answer that question is to test it. So we always test the product. We can look at the pharmacokinetics. We can look at the nitric oxide release profile from the actual lozenge, and then we can give it to patients or consumers and then draw blood, look at the pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, or look at measurable endpoints. What is the effect on blood pressure? What's the effect on exercise performance? What's the effect on blood flow and vasodilation, either through ultrasound or SPECT scans or other imaging modalities? So we always put our products to the ultimate test to make sure that every single person who trusts us with their money, that we're going to deliver on the brand promise of delivering nitric oxide. And that's what we can do that no other company can do.
Yeah, there's a lot of products that are out there. I mean, I remember being in the military, and especially when you go on deployment, you're switching all the other guys out and stuff, and everyone tells you basically what they were taking for their workout routine. Oh, I was stacking this product with this. I remember, what was it, Animal Pack that had all these different vitamins. I mean, taking vitamins and what was the big one?
Explode.
Explode. Yeah, the red bottle, everything. Okay, that was all over the place. Those products had a ton of L-arginine. I think it was L-citrulline. Of course, a ton of caffeine and so forth. What's different between that type of nitric oxide booster versus what you've been bringing to the market?
Ours works. Simple explanation. Yeah, those products don't work. And most of those products are caffeinated. Caffeine's a vasoconstrictor. So even if it did produce nitric oxide, the vasoconstrictive effects of caffeine would override any vasodilatory effects of the nitric oxide. The other problem is arginine and citrulline really doesn't activate or promote nitric oxide production. People become nitric oxide deficient not because they're arginine or citrulline deficient, it's because they've lost the ability to convert it to nitric oxide. So that's the fundamental basis for nitric oxide deficiency. So giving more arginine or citrulline isn't going to fix the problem. And that's what most products are. And then, so what we do is we generate nitric oxide. If your body can't make it, we do it for you, and we fix the reason your body can't make it.
So and one other thing, I've been hearing a lot about dietary nitrate, dietary nitrite, and so forth. But then at the same time, I've heard stuff in the past with hot dogs, with nitrite and so forth. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, we've been misinformed. That's called innovation and evolution of science.
Yeah.
What we thought 50 years ago is not true today.
Okay.
Nitrite and nitrate were once vilified as food additives in hot dogs and cured and processed meats. Today we know that they're an essential, really a dispensable nutrient, and it's the benefits, it's the mechanism of benefit of a plant-based diet. 85% of the nitrate and nitrite we get from our diet come from eating green leafy vegetables. Only 5% comes from eating cured and processed meats. The other 10% comes from swallowing our own saliva.
Really?
Nitrite and nitrate are made endogenously from the oxidation of nitric oxide.
Huh.
So it's complete, it's misinformation. It's a myth that we've kind of debunked.
Yeah.
And people should consume more nitrate and nitrite because it's a precursor and your body utilizes it to make nitric oxide.
So, I mean, you've mentioned vegetables and different meat sources and so forth. So if I'm living in California and on a vegetarian diet with my green smoothie and so forth, or say someone living in Miami that's going to Whole Foods and buying some greens and so forth, how do they know that they're getting the same benefit? Is the nitrate levels the same, or?
No, they're not. We published on this in 2015. There are regional differences. In fact, as much as a 50 to 100-fold difference in the nitrate content of, celery and grown in Los Angeles versus New York, Chicago, or Dallas. So there's no way you can ever determine if you're getting enough nitrate from your diet. You have to almost standardize it, or make sure you can quantify it in the vegetables you're eating, or take a nitric oxide supplement that's not dependent upon that, which is what we do. We don't rely on the conversion of nitrate or getting nitrate from the diet. We generate nitric oxide gas.
So basically, any of those other beet products that are out there and so forth, they would literally have to have some kind of standardized growing process.
That's right.
In order to sustain that. And then some level of testing, of course, to certify that.
That's right.
I would imagine.
Yeah, no company does that. That's the
Wow.
problem.
Wow. So for those of you at home that enjoyed what you heard today, learned anything, felt inspired in any way with Nathan's story, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe for future notifications and future episodes. We're only getting started. This was episode 1, and you've got a lot more coming. So have a blessed day, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, we're just getting started, so stick with us. Cheers.
Cheers, my friend.